The training hall of Zenith Combat Academy was enormous. It stretched so far that Nina Blake could barely see the opposite wall. The floor was made of special material that could change from soft to hard depending on what the instructors needed. Above her head, the ceiling glowed with soft blue light that mimicked natural daylight from a dozen different worlds. Nina walked through the crowd of students. She kept her eyes forward and her steps steady. Around her, aliens of every shape and size moved to their positions. Some had 4 arms. Others had tentacles. A few floated in the air without touching the ground at all. One student looked like a walking crystal formation. Another resembled a cloud of glowing gas held together by a containment suit. She was used to being different. Back home on Earth, she had trained in 3 different martial arts since she was 6 years old. Here at the academy, she was one of only 3 humans in the entire student body. The other 2 humans were in different year groups. She had met them once during orientation. They had warned her that many aliens did not take humans seriously. The instructor stood at the front of the hall. His name was Thalrix, and he belonged to a species called the Aquareth. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with green scales covering his body. 4 arms extended from his torso, each one ending in webbed hands with long fingers. His head was smooth and elongated, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. His species evolved on a water world where they hunted in deep oceans under crushing pressure. Thalrix clapped 2 of his hands together. The sound was sharp and loud. Every student in the hall immediately stopped talking and turned to face him. "Attention, cadets," Thalrix said. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "Today we begin our module on Valerian grappling techniques. These techniques are used by diplomatic security forces across 73 member worlds of the Galactic Council. You will learn holds, breaks, and submission moves. You will work in pairs. I will now assign partners based on weight class and reach." Nina listened as names were called out. The instructor paired students with care, matching species that had similar physical attributes. A heavy, rock-like Grendel was paired with another Grendel. 2 insect-like Trithen students became partners. A pair of energy beings who communicated through light patterns were assigned to each other. Then Nina heard her name. Nina Blake, human. You will partner with Kyle Thorne, Valerian. Nina looked across the training hall. A figure stepped forward from a group of students near the far wall. Kyle Thorne was tall and graceful. He stood about 2 meters in height, with a slim build that looked almost delicate. His skin was a brilliant crystal blue color, smooth and flawless like polished gemstone. He moved with flowing motions that seemed to defy normal physics. His species, the Valorians, came from a low-gravity world where the pull of the planet was only 1/3 that of Earth. Kyle's eyes were silver without any visible pupils. They reflected light like mirrors. His hair was long and white, hanging past his shoulders in straight lines. He wore the standard academy uniform, but somehow it looked more elegant on him than on anyone else. Valorians were famous across the galaxy for their beauty and their sophisticated culture. They were also famous for their pride. Kyle walked toward Nina with slow, deliberate steps. When he reached her, he looked down at her with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and contempt. "A human?" he said. His voice was smooth and musical, but there was an edge to it. "They paired me with a soft worlder?" Several students nearby turned to watch. A few of them laughed quietly. Nina stood still and met Kyle's gaze without flinching. She was used to this kind of reaction. Humans had only joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago. Many species still saw them as newcomers who had not earned their place. "I heard your species bought your way into this academy," Kyle continued. He began to circle around Nina slowly, like a predator examining prey. "Your planet paid extra fees because humans are too fragile for real combat training. Is that true, soft worlder?" "We paid standard admission," Nina replied. Her voice was calm and even. "Same as everyone else." "Standard admission," Kyle repeated with a soft laugh. He stopped circling and stood directly in front of her again. "Yet I have heard that your world is classified as a level 9 death world in the Galactic Registry. How does that work? Either you are fragile creatures who need special protection, or you are dangerous beings from a deadly world. You cannot be both." Nina noticed that more students were watching now. A small furry creature with 6 legs and large black eyes was whispering to its partner. The partner was a tall being made of interlocking metal plates that clicked when it moved. "Earth is really classified level 9? The furry creature whispered. "I thought that was an error in the database." "It is not an error," the metal being replied quietly. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "Deathworld classification is based on multiple factors. Gravity, atmospheric pressure, predator species, disease vectors, weather extremes, tectonic activity. Earth scores very high in all categories. Only 12 known worlds in the galaxy have higher ratings. But Valorians do not believe those ratings, another voice added. This one came from a student who looked like a floating jellyfish inside a water-filled sphere. They think the classification system is flawed because it gives high ratings to worlds they consider primitive. Kyle heard none of this conversation. He was still focused on Nina. His silver eyes studied her as if she were a puzzle he could not quite solve. "Let us see what a Deathworlder can do," Kyle said. He smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "Try not to break too easily. Valerian grappling can be quite intense. I would hate to send you to the medical bay on your first day." Thalrix's voice boomed across the hall again. "All pairs, take your positions. We will begin with basic stance and grip work. Remember, this is a learning environment. Control is more important than strength. Respect your partner's physical limits." Kyle turned away from Nina and walked to an open space on the training mat. He moved with that same flowing grace as if gravity barely affected him at all. Nina followed and stood across from him. She adjusted her stance slightly, distributing her weight evenly on both feet. Kyle noticed her stance and laughed again. "You stand like a fighter," he said. "How cute. But this is not a street brawl, soft worlder. This is an art form. Try to keep up." Thalrix demonstrated the first technique. He called another instructor to the center of the mat to show the proper form. The movement was a basic wrist control followed by a shoulder lock. It looked simple, but Nina could see the complexity in the angles and pressure points. "The key to Valerian grappling is flow," Thalrix explained to the class. His three eyes scanned the room to make sure everyone was paying attention. "You do not fight against your opponent's strength. You redirect it. You use their momentum against them." This technique was developed on low-gravity worlds where brute force is less effective than precise control. Kyle turned to Nina with that same mocking smile. "Did you understand that, or should he explain it more slowly for you?" Nina ignored the comment. She raised her hands into the ready position that Thalrix had demonstrated. Kyle lazily lifted his own hands, barely matching the proper form. "Begin," Thalrix called out. Kyle reached for Nina's wrist with minimal effort. His movements were slow and exaggerated, as if he were demonstrating to a child. "Like this, soft worlder. See? Very gentle. I would not want to hurt you." Nina allowed him to take her wrist. She felt his grip, noting how light it was. His fingers barely applied any pressure at all. She could have broken free easily, but she waited to see what he would do next. Kyle attempted the shoulder lock, but he did it with such little commitment that it had no effect whatsoever. Nina stood completely still, unaffected by the technique. "Oh dear," Kyle said loudly. "It seems I am too weak. Perhaps I need more practice." He released her and stepped back, making a show of looking disappointed in himself. Several nearby students laughed. "Switch," Thalrix called. "Other partner takes the lead." Nina reached for Kyle's wrist with proper form. She applied the exact amount of pressure that Thalrix had demonstrated, no more and no less. Kyle allowed her to complete the movement, but he made exaggerated faces as if she were hurting him. "Ow, ow, ow," he said in a fake whining voice. "So strong. Such power. I cannot possibly defend against this mighty human." More laughter came from the watching students. Nina released him and stepped back. She kept her expression neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. They repeated the drill several times. Each time Kyle added new commentary. He called her adorable when she performed the technique correctly. He asked if she needed a break because humans had such weak endurance. He wondered aloud if the Academy would give him extra credit for babysitting a primitive species. Thalrix moved through the hall, observing different pairs. When he passed Nina and Kyle, he paused for a moment. His three eyes studied them both. Kyle immediately straightened up and performed the technique with perfect form, as if he had been taking it seriously the whole time. Thalrix nodded and moved on to the next pair. The moment the instructor's back was turned, Kyle returned to his mocking behavior. "Your species must be very embarrassed," Kyle said as they reset for another repetition. "Sending you here to represent them, and you cannot even handle basic grappling from a world with 1/3 your gravity. What does that say about human training methods?" Nina took a slow breath. She had dealt with bullies before. On Earth, in her old training halls, there were always students who thought they were better than everyone else. The trick was to stay calm and not let them provoke you into doing something stupid. "Next technique," Thalrix announced. He demonstrated a more advanced move that involved a grip on the collar and a leg sweep. This one requires more commitment. You must trust your partner to fall properly. Safety is essential. Remember your training. Kyle watched the demonstration with a bored expression. When Thalrix finished, Kyle turned to Nina and yawned dramatically. "This is too easy," he said. "Perhaps we should make it more interesting. What do you say, Soft Worlder? Shall we try some real grappling?" "We should follow the instructor's lesson plan," Nina replied. "The instructor's lesson plan is designed for beginners," Kyle said. He stepped closer to her. "I have been training in Valerian techniques since I was 3 years old. I could perform these moves in my sleep. You, however, clearly need more practice. Let me help you." Before Nina could respond, Kyle moved. He was faster than before, no longer pretending to be slow. He grabbed her collar with both hands and pulled her forward. The move was not part of the demonstrated technique. It was aggressive and unnecessarily rough. Nina adjusted her stance to compensate. She maintained her balance easily. Kyle seemed surprised that she did not stumble. "Interesting," he muttered. "You have better balance than I expected." He released her collar and circled around to her side. His silver eyes studied her with more attention now. The mocking smile faded slightly. He seemed to be reassessing her. They continued drilling, but Kyle's attitude had shifted. He was no longer making jokes. Instead, he was testing her. He would grab her wrist harder than necessary. He would push her shoulder during the technique to see if she would lose balance. He would change the angle of the hold without warning. Nina adapted to each variation. Her years of training had taught her how to respond to unexpected changes. She kept her center of gravity low. She moved with the force instead of resisting it. She never lost her balance. Kyle's expression grew darker. The other students had stopped paying attention to them. They were focused on their own training. Thalrix was on the far side of the hall, helping a pair of students who were struggling with the leg sweep. "You are better than you look," Kyle admitted quietly. "But you are still just a human. Let me show you the difference between your world and mine." He moved suddenly much faster than before. His hand shot out and grabbed Nina's throat. It was not a technique from the lesson. It was a chokehold, and it was banned in academy sparring for safety reasons. The grip was tight and deliberate. Kyle's face was close to hers now. His silver eyes were cold and hard. "This is what happens when soft worlders pretend to be warriors," he hissed. His fingers pressed against her windpipe. "You come to our academy, you disrespect our traditions, and you—" He did not finish the sentence. Nina's body reacted before her mind could process the threat. It was pure instinct, trained into her muscles through thousands of hours of practice. Her hand came up and caught his wrist. Her other hand found his elbow. She twisted, shifted her weight, and pivoted. The movement was efficient and brutal. It was a counter technique designed for survival situations. It was designed for Earth gravity, Earth strength, and Earth bone density. Kyle's eyes went wide with shock. He tried to pull away, but it was already too late. There was a sound like a dry branch snapping. The snap echoed through the training hall like a thunderclap. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Every student in the room turned toward the sound. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Drills halted. Even the soft hum of the environmental systems seemed to fade into silence. Kyle's face went from shock to confusion, then to sudden, terrible understanding. His silver eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then the pain hit him. He screamed. It was not a normal scream. It was high-pitched and raw, the sound of someone experiencing agony beyond anything they had ever felt before. His legs buckled beneath him. He dropped to his knees on the training mat, clutching his left shoulder with his right hand. His crystal blue skin had turned pale, almost white. Nina released him immediately. Her hands dropped to her sides. She stepped back, giving him space. Her breathing was steady. Her expression was calm. She looked down at Kyle without emotion, as if watching a training demonstration rather than a real injury. Kyle fell forward onto his hands and knees. His whole body was shaking. He tried to support himself, but his left arm would not respond. It hung at an unnatural angle, the shoulder collapsed inward. Tears streamed down his face. He made choking sounds trying to breathe through the pain. "Medic," someone shouted. The word broke the spell of silence. Suddenly the hall erupted into chaos. Students rushed forward from all directions. Some wanted to help. Others just wanted to see what had happened. A crowd formed around Kyle within seconds. Thalrix was already moving. Despite his size, he crossed the training hall in enormous strides that covered 5 meters at a time. His forearms spread wide, pushing students out of the way. "Clear the area," he commanded. His deep voice cut through the noise like a blade. Give him space. Everyone step back now. The students obeyed immediately, creating a wide circle around Kyle and Nina. Thalrix knelt beside Kyle, his 3 eyes examining the injury with professional focus. One of his hands gently touched Kyle's shoulder. The Valerian screamed again at even that light contact. Do not move, Thalrix said firmly. The medical team is coming. Stay still. From a door at the side of the hall, 3 figures in white uniforms came running. They carried a floating stretcher between them. The medical team consisted of a Grendel, a Trithen, and a small furry species that Nina did not recognize. They moved with practiced efficiency, their equipment floating behind them on anti-gravity platforms. The Grendel reached Kyle first. She was massive, her rocky body towering over everyone else. But her movements were gentle as she scanned Kyle with a handheld device. The device beeped rapidly, displaying information in a language Nina could not read. Collarbone completely fractured, the Grendel announced. Her voice was like grinding stone. Multiple breaks. Bone fragments have shifted. He needs immediate stabilization and surgery. The Tri then produced a device that looked like a metal frame. It unfolded in his insect-like hands, expanding into a support structure. Together with the furry medic, they carefully fitted it around Kyle's shoulder and chest. Kyle screamed again as they moved him, but the device began to glow with soft blue light. Within seconds, his screaming reduced to whimpering. Pain suppressors active, the furry medic said in a squeaky voice. But we need to get him to the medical bay immediately. This injury is severe. They lifted Kyle onto the floating stretcher with extreme care. His body was limp now, the pain medication taking effect. His eyes were half closed, but Nina could see him staring at her. There was fear in that gaze. Real, genuine fear. The medical team rushed Kyle out of the training hall. The door slid shut behind them. The room fell silent again. All eyes turned to Nina. She stood in the center of the mat, exactly where she had been when Kyle grabbed her throat. She had not moved. Her hands were at her sides. Her breathing was normal. There was not a single drop of sweat on her face. She looked completely unbothered by what had just happened. Thalrix stood and faced her. His 3 eyes studied her carefully. What technique did you use? He asked. A counter to a throat grab, Nina replied. Her voice was steady and clear. It is a defensive technique taught in human combat training. When someone attempts to choke you, you break their grip and disable their attacking arm. And you applied it at full strength, Thalrix said. It was not a question. I applied it at normal defensive strength, Nina corrected. Standard response for the situation. Thalrix was quiet for a moment. His scaled face was difficult to read, but Nina thought she saw something like understanding in his eyes. He turned to address the entire class. Training is suspended for today, he announced. All students return to your quarters. I will review the incident footage and file a report with the Academy Board. There will be an investigation. The students began to move toward the exits, but they moved slowly. They kept looking back at Nina. Some whispered to each other. A few pointed at her. Nina heard fragments of conversation as they passed. Did you see that? She barely moved. Kyle grabbed her throat. That's against the rules. But she broke his collarbone like it was nothing. I told you Earth was a level 9 death world. Valerian bones are not designed for that kind of force. She's dangerous. The last comment came from a tall being with multiple eyes on stalks. The being's partner, a floating energy creature, responded immediately. She defended herself. Kyle attacked her first. Defended herself? She destroyed him. Because he was stupid enough to grab a Deathworlder's throat. Nina listened to it all without reacting. She waited as the hall slowly emptied. Within minutes, only she and Thalrix remained. The instructor walked over to her. He stood directly in front of her, his massive form blocking out the light. Nina looked up at him without fear. Did you know what would happen when you used that technique? Thalrix asked quietly. Nina considered the question carefully. I knew it was an effective counter to a chokehold. I did not know his bone structure was different from human bones. I released him as soon as the technique was complete. That is the only reason you are not being expelled right now, Thalrix said. You showed control. You stopped immediately. If you had continued the attack, this would be a very different conversation. He paused, then added, Kyle Thorne violated Academy safety protocols by using a band hold. That will be noted in my report. However, you also need to understand something important. You are stronger than almost every species in this academy. Your world's gravity is 3 times higher than most. Your bone density is greater. Your muscle tissue is denser. You are a product of a death world, and that makes you dangerous. Nina nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Thalrix asked. Because Kyle Thorne will be in surgery for the next 6 hours. His collarbone was not just broken. It was shattered into 17 pieces. His species evolved on a world where bones did not need to be strong because gravity was so light. Your normal is his catastrophic. Nina felt something twist in her stomach. Guilt maybe. Or perhaps just understanding. I will be more careful, she said. See that you are, Thalrix replied. You are dismissed. Nina walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Thalrix begin speaking into a communication device, reporting the incident to the Academy administration. She stepped through the door and into the corridor beyond. Other students were there waiting. They watched her pass in silence. The hearing room was cold and formal. Nina sat alone at a small table facing a panel of 5 Academy officials. The room had white walls and bright overhead lights that made everything look sharp and clinical. Behind her, observation seats were filled with students who had come to watch. She could feel their eyes on her back. The panel consisted of 5 different species. In the center sat Administrator Quell, an elderly being who looked like a tree with a face carved into the bark. His species lived for thousands of years and were known for their wisdom. To his left was Professor Mira, a floating collection of lights that shifted colors as she thought. To his right sat Commander Tor, a massive armored creature with 6 legs and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. The other 2 panel members were a tall, thin being made of shadows and a small reptilian creature with golden scales who served as the Academy's medical director. Administrator Quell tapped a wooden appendage against the table. The sound echoed through the quiet room. This hearing will now begin, he said. His voice was deep and slow, like wind through branches. We are here to investigate the incident that occurred in Combat Training Hall 3, resulting in severe injury to Cadet Kyle Thorne. A holographic display activated above the table. It showed the training hall from multiple angles. Nina watched herself and Kyle on the recording. She saw how small she looked compared to him. She saw him circling her talking. The recording had no sound, but she remembered every word he had said. Let us review the footage, Administrator Quell continued. The recording played in real time. Nina watched Kyle grab her throat. She saw her own hands move up in response. The counter technique happened so fast that the hologram had to slow down to show the details. Even in slow motion, it took less than 2 seconds from grab to release. Then Kyle was falling, his face twisted in pain. Stop there, Commander Tor said. His mandibles clicked rapidly. Replay that sequence again. Slower this time. The hologram repeated the moment. Frame by frame, Nina saw her hand catch Kyle's wrist, her other hand find his elbow, the twisting motion, the precise pressure point on his collarbone. She saw the exact instant the bone gave way. Kyle's expression changed from arrogance to shock to agony in the space of a heartbeat. The technique was executed with precision, Professor Mira observed. Her lights pulsed with a blue color. Cadet Blake knew exactly where to apply pressure and how much force to use. Excessive force, a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned. The door at the back of the hearing room had opened. 3 Valorians entered, all wearing expensive robes that marked them as nobility. The one in front was an older male with pure white skin and silver hair that reached his waist. His eyes were the same color as Kyle's. I am Lord Valen Thorne, the Valorian announced. Kyle Thorne is my son. I demand to speak on his behalf. Administrator Quell's bark-like face shifted into what might have been a frown. Lord Thorne, this is a closed hearing. Family members are not permitted to. My son is in a medical pod recovering from surgery that took 9 hours, Lord Valen interrupted. His voice was cold and sharp. His collarbone was shattered into fragments so small they had to use molecular reconstruction. He will need 3 more surgeries and months of physical therapy. This human used excessive force with intent to cause maximum harm. Nina kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt her stomach tighten. She had not known the injury was that severe. The investigation will determine the facts, Administrator Quell said firmly. Lord Thorne, you may observe from the seating area, but you may not participate in these proceedings. Lord Valen's silver eyes blazed with anger, but he said nothing more. He moved to a seat in the front row, flanked by the 2 other Valorians. They sat down in perfect unison, their postures rigid with controlled fury. The medical director leaned forward. Her golden scales caught the light. I have reviewed Cadet Thorne's injuries in detail, she said. Her voice was high and precise. The collarbone was indeed shattered. However, the investigation requires us to understand why such damage occurred from what appears to be a standard defensive technique. She activated another holographic display. This one showed anatomical diagrams. On the left was a human skeleton. On the right was a Valerian skeleton. The key difference is bone density, the medical director explained. Human bones evolved under Earth's gravity, which measures 9.8 meters per second squared. Valerian bones evolved under their home world's gravity, which measures 3.2 meters per second squared. This means human bones must support approximately 3 times more gravitational force throughout their lives. The diagram zoomed in on the collarbone of each species. The human bone was thick and solid. The Valerian bone was thinner and had a honeycomb structure inside. Human bone density averages 1.9 grams per cubic centimeter, the medical director continued. Valerian bone density averages 1.1 grams per cubic centimeter. That is a difference of approximately 42%. In practical terms, what would be a painful but survivable strike to a human becomes a catastrophic fracture to a Valerian. She should have known this, Lord Valen said from his seat. All students are taught about species differences in their first week. Knowing about differences and understanding their practical application in a combat situation are not the same thing, Professor Mira said. Her lights pulsed with orange now, indicating disagreement. Cadet Blake has been at this academy for exactly 18 days. She has not yet completed the full Introduction to Xenobiology course. Commander Tor clicked his mandibles again. Let us address the core issue. Replay the footage from 30 seconds before the incident. The hologram returned to the training hall. This time it showed Kyle circling Nina, his mouth moving as he spoke. The recording still had no sound, but his body language was clear. He was aggressive, mocking, deliberately invasive of her personal space. Now activate the audio, Commander Tor ordered. Suddenly, sound filled the hearing room. Nina heard Kyle's voice saying the words she remembered so well. You are still just a human. Let me show you the difference between your world and mine. Then his hand shot forward and grabbed her throat. The grip was tight and deliberate. It was clearly visible on the recording. Kyle's fingers pressed against Nina's windpipe. His face was close to hers, his expression angry and threatening. This is what happens when soft-worlders pretend to be warriors, Kyle's recorded voice said. You come to our academy, you disrespect our traditions, and you... The recording showed Nina's counter technique. Then Kyle's scream. Then his collapse. The hearing room was silent. Lord Valen's face had gone pale. The 2 Valorians sitting beside him shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Administrator Quell turned to Thalrix, who sat at a separate table to the side. Instructor, what is your assessment? Thalrix rose to his full height. His forearms crossed over his chest. Cadet Thorn violated Academy Safety Protocol Section 7, Paragraph 3. No choke holds, throat strikes, or attacks targeting the respiratory system during training exercises. This rule exists because such attacks can cause death within minutes if not immediately countered. Cadet Blake responded to a life-threatening situation with appropriate defensive force. Appropriate? Lord Valen stood up, his voice rising. My son's collarbone was destroyed. Your son grabbed a Deathworlder's throat, Thalrix replied calmly. On Earth, such an action would be considered attempted murder. Cadet Blake showed remarkable restraint by releasing him immediately after the counter was complete. If she had continued the attack, your son would have suffered far worse injuries. The shadow being on the panel spoke for the first time. Its voice sounded like whispers layered on top of each other. The evidence is clear. Cadet Thorn initiated the prohibited contact. Cadet Blake defended herself. The severity of his injuries is a result of biological incompatibility, not malicious intent. Administrator Quell looked at each panel member in turn. They all nodded in agreement, even Commander Tor, whose species was known for their strict interpretation of rules. This panel finds that Cadet Nina Blake acted in self-defense against a clear violation of Academy safety protocols, Administrator Quell announced. No disciplinary action will be taken against her. However, Cadet Blake will be required to attend additional training sessions on xenobiology and species-appropriate force levels. This incident highlights the need for better education regarding Deathworld species. He turned his gaze to Lord Valen. Cadet Kyle Thorn will face disciplinary action for his violation of safety protocols. When he recovers sufficiently, he will be placed on probation. Lord Valen's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. He stood, turned sharply, and walked out of the hearing room. The other 2 Valorians followed him quickly. Nina sat very still. Relief washed over her, but it was mixed with something else. Guilt, perhaps. Or maybe just exhaustion. Cadet Blake, Administrator Quell said. You are dismissed. Return to your regular training schedule. Nina stood and saluted. Then she walked out of the hearing room, past the watching students into the corridor beyond. 6 weeks had passed since the incident. Nina walked into Combat Training Hall 3 with the same steady steps as always. The other students no longer stared at her quite as much, though they still gave her a wider space than they gave each other. She had become something of a legend on campus. The human who broke Kyle Thorne was how most students referred to her, though never to her face. Thalrix stood at the front of the hall as usual. His 3 eyes scanned the assembled students as they formed their lines. Nina took her place in the back row as she always did. She preferred to observe from a distance where she could see everyone. Today we have a returning student, Thalrix announced. I expect all of you to welcome him back with respect and professionalism. The doors at the side of the hall opened. Kyle Thorne walked through. He looked different. Thinner maybe. His crystal blue skin seemed duller than before, lacking some of its usual shine. His silver eyes were the same, but they held a different quality now. Something had changed in them. The arrogance was gone. The most obvious change was the device on his left shoulder. It was a specialized medical brace made of some white material that looked like ceramic but bent like rubber. It covered his entire shoulder and extended down to his elbow. Soft blue lights pulsed along its surface in a rhythmic pattern. The brace did more than just support his healing bones. It also generated a microgravity field that reduced the stress on his skeletal structure. Kyle walked to the front of the formation. Every student watched him. The hall was completely silent except for the soft hum of his medical brace. He stopped in the center, facing Thalrix. Then he turned to face the assembled students. His eyes found Nina immediately. She met his gaze without flinching. I have something to say, Kyle began. His voice was quieter than before, lacking the musical arrogance it once carried. 6 weeks ago I made a serious mistake. I violated academy safety protocols. I attacked another student. I did this because of pride and prejudice and ignorance. He paused, taking a slow breath. Nina could see that speaking was difficult for him. Not physically but emotionally. This was clearly something he had practiced but still found hard to say aloud. I believed humans were weak because they came from a world I did not understand, Kyle continued. I believed my species was superior. I believed I could do whatever I wanted without consequences. I was wrong about all of these things. He turned to face Nina directly. Then, slowly and deliberately, he bowed. It was a full bow, his upper body bent at 90 degrees, his right hand placed over his heart in a Valerian gesture of sincere apology. Nina Blake, he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. I attacked you without cause. I endangered your life. You defended yourself as you had every right to do. The injury I received was entirely my own fault. I apologize for my actions and for the disrespect I showed you and your species. I hope that someday you might forgive me. Nina stood motionless for a moment. She had not expected this. In her mind, she had imagined Kyle returning angry, resentful, looking for revenge. She had prepared herself for more conflict. Instead, she was facing genuine remorse. She walked forward through the ranks of students. They parted to let her pass. When she reached Kyle, she stopped directly in front of him. He straightened from his bow, meeting her eyes. I accept your apology, Nina said clearly. I hope your recovery continues well. Kyle's expression showed relief. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more than you know. Thalrix stepped forward, his forearms spread wide. Let this be a lesson to all of you, he said to the class. Respect for your fellow students is not optional. Understanding differences between species is not optional. These things can mean the difference between training and tragedy. He gestured to Kyle. Take your position in the formation. You will be observing today, not participating until medical clears you for active training. Kyle nodded and moved to the side of the hall where he could watch without being in the way. Nina returned to her position. The training session began, but she could feel something had changed in the atmosphere. The other students seemed more thoughtful, more careful with each other. After the session ended, Nina was gathering her training gear when Kyle approached her. He walked carefully, favoring his left side. The medical brace made soft humming sounds with each movement. May I speak with you? He asked. Nina looked at him and nodded. Kyle glanced around to make sure no one else was close enough to hear. During my recovery, I spent a lot of time in the medical bay. They made me study xenobiology as part of my rehabilitation. I learned things about death worlds that I never knew before. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your world has 6 times the predator species of most civilized worlds. Your diseases are more lethal. Your weather patterns are more extreme. Your tectonic activity causes constant earthquakes. You evolved in an environment that was actively trying to kill you every single day. And yet your species not only survived but thrived. You built cities, art, music, technology. You reached the stars. Nina listened without interrupting. I was taught that your planet was primitive, Kyle continued. But I understand now. You are not primitive. You are survivors. Everything about your biology, your reflexes, your strength, it all exists because your world demanded it. I grabbed your throat and your body reacted the way it had to react to survive. You could not have responded any other way. I could have been more aware of the difference between us, Nina said quietly. I should have pulled the technique before completing it. I'm not blameless. Kyle shook his head. You reacted in less than a second. No one can think that fast. It was pure instinct. He looked down at his braced shoulder. This injury taught me humility. It taught me respect. And it taught me that I have much to learn. He met her eyes again. Would you be willing to teach me? Not fighting techniques. I mean, teach me about death world awareness. Help me understand how someone from Earth thinks and reacts. I do not want to make this mistake again with you or with anyone else. Nina considered the request. She saw genuine sincerity in his expression. This was not a trick or a game. He really wanted to learn. Yes, she said. I will help you. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Nina began meeting with Kyle twice a week in a small study room near the library. At first they talked about Earth. She described the planet's challenges. The storms. The predators. The constant need to be aware of your surroundings. She explained how human children learned from a young age to assess threats, to move quickly, to react without thinking. Kyle listened with intense focus. He asked questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand. Sometimes other students would see them together and look confused. The human who broke Kyle Thorne and Kyle Thorne himself, sitting together peacefully talking like friends. Word spread. Other students became curious. One day, a small furry student approached Nina after training. Is it true you are teaching Kyle about death worlds? The creature asked in its squeaky voice. Yes, Nina replied. Could you teach others? Many of us have never met someone from a high-level death world before. We do not understand how to interact safely. That was how the informal classes began. Nina started holding sessions in one of the empty training halls twice a week. At first, only 5 students came. Then 10. Then 20. Within a month, nearly 50 students were attending regularly. She taught them about gravity differences and how they affected strength and reaction time. She taught them about threat assessment and why death world species seemed paranoid to others. She taught them about pain tolerance and recovery rates. Most importantly, she taught them about respect for differences. Thaurix attended one of her sessions. He sat in the back and watched as Nina demonstrated proper defensive techniques for different species, showing how to adjust force levels based on bone density and body structure. When the session ended, he approached her. The Academy Board wants to make this official, he said. They want to create a new course, Death World Species Integration. They want you to help design the curriculum. Nina was surprised. I am just a first-year student. You are a first-year student who has taught this academy an important lesson, Thaurix replied. Sometimes the best teachers are those who have lived the experience. Kyle recovered fully after 3 months. His shoulder required 2 more surgeries, but eventually the medical brace came off. The first day he returned to active training, he was paired with Nina again. The entire class watched nervously. They performed the drills exactly as instructed. Kyle moved with care and respect. Nina matched his energy level perfectly. When the session ended, they bowed to each other in the traditional way. As they walked off the training mat together, Kyle said quietly, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for taking it seriously," Nina replied. They were not friends exactly, but they had become something else. 2 people from different worlds who had learned to understand each other. And in that understanding they had both grown.